no looking back, no regrets, only forward. It is a lot different than I expected, and it just means that we've had to be really creative.
Fast, relentless, and in plain sight. With 2 companies sold and another one scaling now, I have zero tolerance for fake numbers or easy excuses. My guest today, Megan Dobro, traded academia's chalk dust for the cannabis dust of SafeTiva Labs. Massachusetts is buzzing about lab testing fraud and THC inflation, and Megan is on the front line explaining the science behind it.
I do think that they need more oversight of what the labs are doing, how they're doing it, checking records, checking trainings, and making sure that we're all at the same level with our quality.
She breaks down the tricks shady operators pull, how SafeTiva Labs spots bogus potency, and why she welcomes surprise audits. You'll hear how a Burning Man microscope reshaped her view of bias, the clipboard hustle at NECANN that launched her business, and the legislation she's pushing to level the playing field.
I felt so confident with where we are. It's so solid now, and now I can just put it all out there and hope that people can see all the work that we've put into it.
This episode proves that one bold pivot can rewrite every rule you live by. Buckle up, because we're about to get nerdy with testing labs.
I'm Megan Dobro. I'm a scientist, and I'm the founder and CEO of SafeTiva Labs. It's a testing lab in Westfield, Mass.
Westfield. How long did it take you to get here today? Westfield.
Well,
There's 700, there's 300 towns, 380 towns in Massachusetts. I should know more of them.
Westfield's right off the pike, so it's pretty accessible to the state. I came from home this morning, so it was 2 hours, and I live north of Amherst in Everett.
But Westfield, was that a location you strategically chose?
Well, knowing that we would be picking up samples around the state, I wanted to make sure that we had good access to the highway. So we're right off the pike, and we're also right near the intersection of the 91 that goes north. And so it's pretty easy for us to get around.
Yeah, 91's pretty legit because it's Springfield. Everything's right on that 91 corridor.
Yeah.
All right. So when it comes to getting into the cannabis industry, why did you think it was going to be anything like this? And
No.
what were your conceptions of getting into the industry in the beginning?
Well, when I was really, I spent a year researching the testing landscape, the market, how it all works, the regulations, before I decided to jump in and build SafeTiva. And at the time, there were 2.5 labs.
Half a lab?
Yeah.
How's that work?
There was one that was doing medical only. And so it was the bottleneck of the whole industry. There was 8-week turnaround times, and everyone was really beholden to those 2 labs. And I felt like with my experience in research and molecular biology, especially, that I could bring newer technology to testing that was faster and accurate and reliable. That was a little different than how the labs were doing it when I was building.
Because you studied what they were currently doing. I think back then it was CDX and MCR.
That's right.
Those are the 2. Okay.
Yeah.
So going back to those days and thinking through kind of the steps to get to where you are today, was there a point, what was the turning point you were like, I think I can do this better?
During that year, while I was researching them, the 2 labs were in the news a lot, kind of fighting with each other about
in good ways.
PCR plating.
PCR plating.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a technical, scientific thing.
Yeah, so that was how they were doing microbial testing. But for me, it was really the turnaround time, and it was having conversations with tech providers at the time about how could we do it faster. And so we were able to do it where our total test time, we were doing it 2-day turnaround time when we opened.
Wow.
And obviously there were many more labs at the time, and so the market kind of spread out.
Yeah, I want to know more about that. So you had the idea, what year approximately?
So it was 2019 that I started looking at the cannabis industry.
And when you launched, what year was it?
SafeTiva had our opening day in 2022.
Right. So 3 years later, approximately.
Yeah.
And by the time 3 years later, how many labs were in the market?
There were 8.
There were already 8. So a lot of other people probably had a similar idea.
Exactly.
Like either I could do it better, whether it's turnaround time, whether it was the science behind it.
It was the bottleneck. We needed more labs. At that time, there were not enough labs.
Yeah.
And
there's more operators coming online every day.
Right.
And they all needed products
It was
tested.
growing. There was capital. It was a beautiful time.
It was a great time to be in cannabis, right?
Yeah.
Great, especially those early days. And I think because we officially incorporated in 2020, even though I was thinking about it back in 2019, but we didn't launch until 2022 either.
Yeah.
And I think back to those days and be like, wow, there was like still an influx of capital coming in and stuff like that. And the conversations around like the growth of the industry is still very positive back then.
Yeah.
So
Right.
looking back on that, before we go too far down to like what's happening nowadays, because I want your opinion on, some of the bills that are coming out, some of the memos that the CCC has dropped against around testing labs, just the general controversy around testing labs.
Yeah.
And, Commissioner Roy went so far as to call it fraud, right? Yeah. So going back to those days, though, I guess, knowing what you know now, would you choose to go down this path?
I ask myself that every day. I loved my job before cannabis. I was a professor at Hampshire College. I loved working with students. I really liked doing that. And so it was even harder to jump when I was really happy. And so I kind of look back fondly, but I know that academia, especially liberal arts colleges, are also suffering right now.
Right now, especially.
And so I don't think that I should have stayed. And I don't know what else I would have done anyway. So there's really no looking back, no regrets, only forward. There's nothing I can do but move forward. But it is a lot different than I expected, and it just means that we've had to be really creative. In some ways doubling down on our mission, and in other ways pivoting and focusing on some new things and figuring out how are we going to future-proof when you never know what's going to happen in cannabis.
We're always getting thrown curveballs.
Yeah.
From the state, the CCC. There's a bunch of bills going out to the House and Senate that have been published, and the testimonials and all this other stuff are testimony for those bills. So there's a lot of moving parts. Good Vibes is more than a product. It's your cannabis toolkit. Drop it into your drink, mix it into tea, kick up your mocktail, or just pop it in straight. You can even bake or cook with it. Our unflavored option is perfect for brownies or any recipe where you want control and precision. No more guessing how strong your edibles are. Available in 500 milligram and 1,000 milligram bottles, and flavors like strawberry, grape, blue ras, and our newest, mango guava 1,000 milligrams. Grab your toolkit at dispensaries across Massachusetts or at getgoodfeels.com. And as always, 21 plus only. Please consume responsibly. But so getting back into stepping back again, were you a consumer before? Is that why you were like, hey, I think I could do this better? I'm also a fan of the plant. You got in it because you would love the plant and you saw like a better way of path forward?
I was a casual consumer. It wasn't a big part of my life, and I didn't really know that much about all the different product types of cannabis. For me, it was more about I love building projects. I love building teams. It was just a really exciting, totally different thing for me. And at that time when I had just had a baby, Hampshire College was struggling financially. I felt like I was in a rut. I had been working toward being at Hampshire and working toward tenure really my entire academic life. And then I got tenure, and then I think 9 days later, Hampshire announced that they weren't going to take a fall class of students. We were just going to teach out the students that we had and close. And so they ended up surviving and staying open, but everyone kind of had this panic moment of what else would I do? And at the time, some friends of mine from California who I knew from Burning Man contacted me and said that they wanted to build a testing lab in Western Mass. Do I know any scientists looking for a job in Western Mass, which is, really a really hard fulfillment. And I said, I don't know much about it, but maybe me. And so that's when I started really researching, and that group didn't work out. But over the next year they planted the idea in my head, and then I researched for the next year, and then I saw what the other labs were doing. I saw the landscape. I really made a roadmap of how I'm going to build this. And then I jumped in both feet. My husband was very supportive. We rented a big warehouse in Westfield, and then I just did it. I was just excited about it. And so I had a solid appreciation for the plant ahead of time, as well as psychedelics. For me, like that, it's all kind of in the same category in terms of how I was using it previously. But it was really more about, I was excited about this new industry in Massachusetts, and I was excited about the community coming together around something that they were really passionate about, and I felt like I could provide a really good support for the industry.
Yeah, and I think that's, so you went in full, you just went 2 feet in, you were like, this is it.
Yeah.
And nothing's going to stop you then. You're just like,
That's
nothing's
right.
going to stop me. I'm
That's
just going to
right.
do this.
That's right.
And thinking back, I guess, to when you launched those 8 labs, how many are still in existence?
Of those 8, 1, 2, I think 2 have closed, and then a few more opened after that, and 3 more opened after and then closed.
So how many, at its peak, how many testing labs were there?
At its peak, there were 15 or 16,
Wow.
and now there are 10.
There are 10, so 5 have closed since.
Yeah.
And there can only be a few. I mean, winners, true winners in any industry, really, right? And so this is the support system. This is vital for the cannabis industry to survive and thrive in a certain extent.
Yeah.
So taking your learnings, and you're so buttoned up. Burning Man? Like, what's going on? Like, you're just like hanging out in Burning Man and talking to some cannabis people. And
I did my PhD in California, in Los Angeles, and so I had the very nerdy campus of Caltech surrounded by the very artsy world of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And it turns out scientists really know how to party. They were the most fun ones to hang out with. And we had a science-themed camp at Burning Man where we set up microscopes and we had talks that people would give about their research and teaching the community about science.
Oh, that's fun.
So it was a very nerdy Burning Man camp.
Everybody has different. I've heard so many various experiences with Burning Man. I remember I had hired this Android developer back in like 2012 or something like that, 2013, and he was like, I'm going to Burning Man. I'm like, cool. He came back and he literally was not the same person, and he was like, I am going on a different journey now.
Yeah.
And he just quit, and I'm like, okay.
Same thing happened to my husband.
Wow.
He went to Burning Man. He came back a totally different person. Huh. Quit his job, moved across the country. Totally different psyche.
Were you together at that time?
We were, yeah.
Interesting.
It was a very stark difference between the two.
And I feel like there's something special about that, without a doubt. And I think nobody's path is fully planned out and plotted out.
Yeah.
You know, how the future work. It's like you have that, tomorrow I know what I'm doing, but 3 years it gets really broad, like all these different trajectories you can go on.
Well, the wild thing is I thought that I saw my whole life in front of me in academia. I thought that was it for me. I was going to do that my whole life. And in academia, it's very structured with you're an assistant professor, you're an associate professor, you're a full professor. Here's what you need to get. Here's what you need to do to get to those different stages. Mm-hmm. I had it all mapped out. I didn't know what projects I would work on and where my research would go. But I had a sense of how my life was going to look in that environment, raise a family, focus on my kids. And so when that 2019 email came from Hampshire saying that the college was going to close, it totally spun me around 180, and suddenly something that I had been working on from high school science classes, college, majoring in biology, minoring in chemistry, getting my PhD, all of that was to be a tenured professor. Like my whole
that was your journey. You had
that
mapped out.
And I thought it was, once you have tenure, your whole career is like stable and structured. Yeah. And
I remember that. I was a professor at one point, and I remember not getting tenure, but I remember the big deal, like, hey, don't you want tenure? And I was always that oddball out, you know what I mean? Because I was teaching programming and video games and all kinds of stuff that no one else really wanted to teach back then. This is like 2002, 2003, I can't remember. And I remember they invited me to this like special like party that they were hosting, and I was supposed to sit with the dean, and we were supposed to talk about like full-time position and stuff like that. And I just was like, I didn't show up.
Jason.
I was also like in my early 20s, so I was like, what does this really mean to me? Because I never saw myself as a full-time professor. I miss college life, not because of the partying, but because of the atmosphere of like, you have creativity. The academics can be hard. It's hard as you make it. You know what I mean? Like I did like the challenge of academics, but around that same time when I was in college, actually before this whole professor stuff started happening, I was, I got carried away with like, LAN parties and stuff like that, like video game parties, like all my friends, because we're all computer science nerds.
So funny.
And so people were like, hey, let's get your computer. We'll bring it together. We'll network it and like we'll start playing Quake 2 or whatever the game was back then. And we would just like party all night and just like play video games. And I'd wake up and be like, oh man, I didn't do any of my work anymore. You know, so like my work got pushed aside because of this new kind of like college freedom. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
That's so funny.
long story short, I never saw myself to go to academia, but I do like that lifestyle, because I would love to have like, you know, the corduroy jacket or the, you know, the patches on the side and be like walking down Harvard Square and like I could imagine that lifestyle and being like, oh, that's so cool. Like I have my coffee in the morning at this cafe and I go to teach these students and I go, and I just love that plan. For some people, but for me, I've always just been that oddball. I'm just like, I just go kind of where my curiosity takes me in a sense.
Yeah.
But I know there's people out there, and I tell my kids this all the time, like, if you don't know exactly what you want to do, that's okay. But do something, you know what I mean? And you'll figure out kind of which path you want to go on.
Right.
But you were like, I know exactly
what I wanted to do. Wow. And it was focused on teaching first, science second. Science was just what I thought was the most fun to teach. It was most fun for students to learn. And what I really loved about academia was the community and having a built-in community by being on a college campus. And so there were peers everywhere of all flavors and events to go to and going to everyone's talks that I thought were really interesting. And it's something I love about the cannabis industry as well, is it's really focused on community.
It is.
And local community, especially in Massachusetts.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you bring that up, because conferences are a big part of the scene. There's also random events that are happening all around the state. Yeah. And, you know, plug to the newsletter, Jason's Highlights. We also support like all these events by giving them free advertising to be able to, you know, make sure people show up to these events, or even people that are aware that these events are happening. Because that's why I created it, because I wasn't aware of half the events that were happening. So I was like, hey, everybody send me the events and I'll just broadcast it everywhere.
It's a very useful tool.
And so speaking of those events, we have Flower Expo coming up. There's a couple of things, you know, there's always events that are happening. Like when you think about events, typically, what is your goal going to these events? Do you have something pre-prepared? You're like, I want to go talk to these 5 people and I'll like.
No, I used to be like that when I first came to the industry. Okay, my first NECANN, this is how much of a dweeb I am. My first NECANN, I showed up with a clipboard. Oh. I literally walked around with a clipboard, and I would see a booth and I would like psych myself up to go talk to them.
It's hard.
Yeah. I mean, just because I felt like an outsider at that point. This was in 2019. And remember when back when they had 2 NECANNs, they would have a Springfield one and a Boston one.
What year was that? I think my first NECANN was like
2019.
Yeah, my first one was like 2020, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there were 2 that year. And so it was really fun to see it from an outsider. And now that I feel like every year I feel more comfortable with who's there and I know more people, I don't have any agenda. I don't have anything pre-planned. My goal with every event is just relationship building. Yeah. I just want to get to know people better.
I think it has to be, because the people who have that set agenda, who are going in, they kind of go on, they go hard in the paint with like the sales. And it's just like, wait a second. Off-putting. Yeah, it's super off-putting to a lot of people, especially in the cannabis industry, where for the most part, very laid back people. Yeah. And, you know, I tell people this all the time, through relationships, you can kind of obviously grow, you know, beyond that one person. You can introduce to more people and stuff like that. But your reputation also precedes you. And so you do have to be careful with like, okay, you know, if you go too hard into the sales side of things, then the person's gonna be like, oh, don't talk to that guy. He's just gonna talk your ear off about testing labs or something like that. Like, hey, $300, I'll get you a deal, or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, it's not just about that, right? Yeah. And speaking as a fellow outsider, because cannabis was never a big part of my life. I only had a medical issue, which is why I ended up coming here through passion, ultimately, for the plant itself. And I do feel like that outsider mentality, because I'm also introverted. And so I'm like, it is hard to walk up to a booth and be like, hi, my name is Jason. I sell, you know, THC tinctures or whatever. Yeah. So long story short, though, networking at these things is really relationship building. And everybody should understand that at this point. I mean, if you're coming into it new, pay attention. If you're going to a conference, just lay off the sales pitch. Like, just build the relationships, and they'll get to know you, and you'll probably get their business if you're just cool.
It's
you know
a
what I mean?
very relationship-driven industry. People do business with people they like.
Oh, absolutely.
People they know.
Yeah, I actually just had Derek D'Ambrosio on, and he said, "Do cool shit with cool people." That's all I want to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Getting back to the present day, back to reality, we are dealing with controversy. Lots of controversy. Could you summarize kind of like the state of affairs with testing labs?
Yeah.
In one word or many? In one word, is it shit show or?
Yeah, it's chaos.
Chaos.
It's total chaos.
Yeah.
It's chaos because I don't always know day to day the right path for moving forward. I don't always know. Sometimes I feel very convicted and this is where we need to go. And then I'll learn something else and I'll change my mind. And I think it's tough when we're working with regulators and legislators and we need to advocate very strongly for what we want, but the industry doesn't all agree on where we should go. And I think that's the hard part. So the controversy is that there's natural variability. So if you look at test results across labs, legitimate, honest labs, cannabis is a plant. It's not homogeneous. We all know it's the THC can vary within a single bud, within a plant, within a two-dimensional canopy. And so you have the natural variability as well as the regulations are pretty vague around testing and how we should handle samples, what methods we should use, how we analyze that data, and what we report. Pretty vague. For a scientist, it's a very uncomfortable place to be because we want protocols that are very detailed with no questions. And so labs are interpreting the regs in their own ways and doing different things. And so there's this natural variability that's going to happen just by nature of how it was all set up.
Well, by nature of the plant, but also nature of the setup itself and the regulations.
Right.
Okay.
And then on top of that, we have some outliers where for THC, we've got the natural variability, and then we've got a lab way up here. And for microbial testing, we've got variability, and then we've got a lab that's just flatlined at zero.
At zero. No microbial activity at all.
Right.
Completely not present.
They pass everything at zero, not detect. And so I think that's a separate issue, and the two issues get conflated a lot. You can take the same sample to multiple labs and get different results, and that doesn't mean that there's fraud. Mm-hmm. Those labs could be doing what they think is the best way to do it.
Their SOPs, the way that they treat or process their material to be able to get a COA, certificate of analysis, is their version of what their interpretation of the regulations are, whereas other labs may have different ones. So therefore, the natural variability of the plant, stuff like that, everything plays a factor. So just because you see a different COA when you send it to a testing lab and it's off by like 5% or something like that, that doesn't indicate fraud.
Right. Okay. Exactly.
So when it comes to these, and then on top of that is the outliers. So when it comes to the outliers, I guess that's kind of where it goes into the fraud side. That's just like, oh, we're just passing whatever, or non-detect for microbials. Like, how do you even do that? Like, is it if you were starting your lab today, and I'm not saying you would do this, of course, but because you don't, but if you were starting a lab today and you're like, I'm going to make a bunch of money, which nobody says that anymore. But it's, work with me from this hypothetical. They come in and they're like, oh, I'm going to make a ton of money. I just have to pass everybody and give everybody 40% THC results and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Did they is it easy to just do that?
If no one's watching, if no one's looking at your protocols, if no one's watching from start to finish, how do you do things? I'm sure there are many ways along the process to put your thumb on the scale in one way or another. Mm-hmm. For a lab to make a lot of money in this industry, as you said, very high THC numbers. I can't speak to what those labs are doing to get those numbers. And I think the whole reason why I am trying to work with the CCC so much is because we need to push investigations and figure out what's different. If maybe it's not fraud, I can think of many legitimate reasons why there would be outlier labs. One example would be for the very small labs who have a small sample size, like we were at SafeTiva for the first year really of our operation, if you have a small sample size, you're very reliant on the products coming in from one or two facilities. And so if they're really buttoned up with their hygiene, or they're really masterful at growing plants that have high THC, you could be very skewed because you're not doing that many samples. As you get bigger, the numbers should really average out to be closer to the national industry average.
That makes sense.
And so I'm not saying that there's fraud necessarily. I'm saying we need an investigation and we need a report about why. And I think the CCC is looking into things here and there, but we've never been told what is the reason, going back years, why there's data that's outlying and it's still happening today. And
nobody's calling it out until the industry kind of called it out in a sense.
Yes. And the industry is to some degree self-correcting, because I'm seeing only now, like really just in this 2025 year, where COAs from some labs are being devalued. Mm-hmm. If a COA from a certain lab that everyone knows has skewed results comes across a buyer's desk, they're either asking for discounts or rejecting it altogether. Mm-hmm. I am seeing that. And so I think there is some correcting that's happening. But we also are still hearing many operators who say, I have to use one of those labs in order to compete, to just my products on the shelves. Right. Just to get my money back. And, everyone is in a desperate situation.
Yeah. And I think that's the urgency around a lot of this is everybody's kind of, there's a lot of finger pointing, but there's also just the survival of these operators is kind of hanging in the balance with some of these results. Right. And I've proposed a couple of solutions on my end, which I won't get into here, but maybe I'll get into one of them. But, whose fault is it? Is it the consumer's fault that's just driving THC up, like percentage? Like, I just want 40%, but I'm not going to, 20%, but I won't touch it because it's half the value, right? Right. And then the cultivators are like, well, I can't grow that strain anymore because it had, 1-to-1 balance of CBD and THC in it. And now I can't grow that anymore because everybody just wants pure, straight gas the entire time, And they only will respond by 30%, 40% plus THC. Yeah. Which just seems impossible to me. 40% by weight THC on a plant, which means that it's almost half THC in the plant itself. And going a little nerdy on this one, the THC is really in the trichomes. So that means you've just got this frostiest trichome heads, like giant heads or something, or just millions and millions of heads that are just like popping, bursting with THC. Yeah. And the rest of it is just like plant matter, right? Which is, all these other constituent ingredient compounds like cellulose and plant fiber.
Exactly.
So to me, I always think to myself, how is it even possible? But again, going back to whose fault is it? Is it the consumer that's driving these things? Is it the buyers? I have some buyers, like Derek, actually, speaking of him, he actually said on the pod last time, he has to go see the plant. He has to, he will go in, and I know a couple buyers like this who are super smart about it. They will go to the facility and they will not buy it unless they've actually visited the facility and looked at their facility. Because, as he said, he comes from the traditional market. So he's just like, in the traditional market, I have to see it. I actually have to see it before I sell it. And so it's not just a spreadsheet to him. It's not like, hey, it's 40%, I'm going to take it,
That's great.
And then it goes back again. So cultivators have to go, okay, it's got to be jacked up and all this other stuff to 40%. Because the stores are demanding it and the consumers are demanding it. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, so this lab A gave me 25% and lab B gave me 35%. Who am I going to choose? And then lab shopping becomes a thing. And all of a sudden everybody's using this one lab. Going back to your point, then they start discounting it because they're like, well, that lab we know inflates things, so whatever. The natural variability is just another thing that compounds the entire issue entirely, because you potentially could have gotten 35% from one part of the plant and 25% from a different part of the plant.
Yeah. Right.
So, like, do we have any solutions for any of this?
Well, we need better sampling and homogenization. Excuse me.
No worries. So getting back, actually, that's an interesting, homogenization is an interesting thing, because I was actually thinking, if I was trying to trick the testing labs, what would I do? I was like, you know what I do? I drop like a little drop of distillate in my plant.
Yeah. And
I bet there's people
we would test it as it arrives, and we probably wouldn't know. I think there is adulteration of the samples that go to testing.
Yeah, because then it's on the cultivator to be like, hey, I'm just going to get some distillate, just drop a little drop in each one of my samples, send it away, and all of a sudden it's 10% higher.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But going back to homogenization or some kind of standards.
Yeah, so
sampling.
Massachusetts is one of the few states in the country that doesn't specify how big the sample needs to be that we collect from the facility. And so it's up to the labs to choose. And we get a lot of pressure from cultivators and manufacturers to only pull as little mass as possible because it's all wasted in the testing process. We get less pressure about that than in the early days, but labs are generally only picking the very minimal amount that they need.
And what is that amount typically? Is it like 1 gram, 3.5?
No, it's like
it's like an eighth?
It's like 5 grams to 8 grams.
Okay. And so for a cultivator, are they worried that they're losing money for those 8 grams? That seems bizarre.
No, it's really more important for the concentrates that are valued more per gram.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, depending on the type of concentrate, it could be, even a wholesale price could be $20 a gram. But still, it seems a little bit short-sighted. So when it comes to, like, what's the solution, I guess, for the sampling side of this?
Yeah, so we need to specify that the sample needs to be a percentage of the batch, like most other states. So in other states, it's either 0.35% of the batch or 0.5% of the batch is sampled.
What is that in real numbers?
It can be up to like 100 grams.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if I do my math briefly in my head, which I hate doing public math, this episode is brought to you by Good Feels, makers of Good Vibes, the fast-acting tincture that actually delivers. Whether you're into classic flavors like grape, blue raz, or strawberry, or want to try our brand new 1,000 milligram mango guava, we've got a vibe for every taste. Just pop it into your drink and feel it kick in fast. None of the wait, all the feels. Available now in 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams bottles across Massachusetts dispensaries or at getgoodfeels.com. As always, 21 plus only, and please consume responsibly. But if we're talking about a sample, I mean, because if you do like 0.5%.
We're currently at like 0.03% sampling.
Okay.
And so we're like a tenth less than what other states are sampling.
So at a batch size basis, though, what does that mean?
Yeah, based on 15 pounds.
So 15 pounds of flour, you get a sample of 5 to 8 grams.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And in manufacturing, the batches can be unlimited. It's however they made at the same time in the same.
So 15 is just the 0.3. Whereas, like, if somebody had a batch size, if somebody was a batch of 100 pounds because it's just a giant grow room and it's all one batch, it's still just 5 to 8 grams, which means that now it's way less than 0.3.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. We're at 0.03.
At that point.
And
0.03.
Yeah, that's where we
You're
are.
10 times lower already.
15 pounds. Right.
Wow.
And so in other states, as the labs are getting more mass, they're homogenizing it all together. And so I think you average out some of that variability.
Well, what about the stores that are doing, like, buy this cola, like this beautiful, like, cola,
Yeah.
Like, how do you test that even then?
Well,
because it's not homogenous, it's one plant, and that's natural variability.
They're just giving us a sampling of the whole batch, and they pick it, and whatever they give us gets destroyed in the testing. So we could get a cola, we could get a bunch of little popcorn buds, whatever we get, as long as it's the mass that we need, we homogenize that on our end, and then we do our testing. But whatever they didn't touch of the batch is still sellable. So they could give us the smallest buds, they could give us the biggest buds, they could grind it before giving it to us, they could give it to us whole. It's like the testing is separate from what's on the shelves.
Right, exactly. So but I was thinking about the natural variability again, because it's like, okay, I want to sell this beautiful cola by itself. Are you picking off the cola, or are you actually, since that's a batch of, like, 100 different colas, then you just kind of set aside a little bit. But getting back to the original question, what's the solution? So you're saying better sampling. So increasing the amount of flour that gets sent to you for samples?
Yeah. Yep. And right now the sampling procedure says that you dump all the buds out on a table and you draw a quadrant, and then you choose samples from each quadrant, package it up, and send it out.
That's on the cultivator to do?
Yes.
Oh, that's how that works.
And then in other states, they have it in a container. or multiple containers, and they do container pulls. They either use a device or they put on a glove and use their hands. They dip into the container, and whatever they pull out, that's one sample, and then they go to another container. And so they're pulling it truly blind and with more mass. So I think that's probably much more representative than we're doing in Massachusetts.
Right. Because if you just dump some flour on the table and you just be like, oh, that one looks really great. Let me pull that one, right? Interesting. Yeah. So even the sampling process is just, it's such an interesting idea. Concept. I had no idea that's how it was pulled. Because again, I'm a brand. I'm a manufacturer. I don't, we purchase on the wholesale market, whatever was tested, fully. But, and I think about these cultivators and I think about, is it like, how do you prevent, because this is all, at the end of the day, this is a behavioral thing. It's just like, okay, I'm a little bit looser with my interpretation of the rules, so therefore I'm going to play a little bit looser when I'm setting my samples in. Yeah. And so everybody, it just and then it compounds throughout the whole process until it gets to the customer. Right. And they're like, this is not even good, and it's supposed to be 40%, Yeah. So I guess going back to, again, the sampling side, so one of the solutions might be just like doing a better sampling process for the cultivators themselves.
Yeah, and it has to be under camera so that an inspector could come and pull up any day and say, show me your sampling on that day.
Yeah, and so I'm typically opposed to more regulations. As an entrepreneur, I'm just like, well, I don't need to follow more rules because I do everything the right way. So there are a bunch of cultivators probably who are like, well, I'm already doing it the best I can, and I'm everything above board, and I make beautiful products, and I've never had any microbial issues because I take care of my plants. I make my room super sanitized and cleaned, and after every batch, we just do all the kinds of crazy stuff in order to make sure it's perfect. But now they have to do all these extra steps to be able to prove it again, where they're kind of just like, get out of the way. Like, we're trying to grow an industry. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, if they're doing it the right way, they're probably already doing something similar to what I'm asking the state to just make a level playing field for them. And I think the ones who are doing it right have the most to gain by having stricter regulations, because right now they're doing it right, but they're competing with people who aren't. And so if you make everyone do it right, then their product now suddenly looks better across the landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can definitely relate to it on the brand side, because sometimes we see brands out there doing things where we're just like, if you can do that, why? Like, I guess we could do that then. But my team comes back and like, but we would never do that though.
Yeah.
Right. For instance, there was that product out the day. I can call them out because it's gone now from the shelves, but Countdown, remember Countdown?
No.
Countdown was a drink about 8 to 10 ounces. It was like a little mini can, basically.
Yeah. That
they put this little, like half a ping pong ball or something like that, like a little cup on it. So they had this like plastic cup that went on. It fit nicely on the can, but the can was 25 milligrams of THC, but they called it 5 servings.
Oh, yeah.
And you can't do multi-serving drinks, so therefore they called it a tincture. So it was a 5-serving tincture of 5 milligrams each, but it came in an aluminum can.
Yeah.
So everybody's just like,
yeah,
how are they getting away with that exactly? Like, because we would have loved to put out multi-serving beverage. Mm-hmm. That was one of our core dreams back in the day, because I was like, oh, I'd love to put out like a non-alcoholic gin and infuse that with THC and sell that to customers as well. And, one shot is like 5 milligrams or something like that, but it wasn't allowed. Mm-hmm. Everything has to be measured and all this other stuff. And then we'd have to call it a tincture and some weird stuff like that. But like, we just wanted kind of like fair rules for everybody, right? That level playing field that you just said. And we're not, personally, I'm not, since I'm the 99% owner of the company, I'm not willing to sacrifice the license because I just want to make a quick buck.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so again, you go back to the honest operators who are trying to do the right thing all the time and getting penalized because it's not a level playing field. Right. So what you're saying is to bring out that level playing field for everybody, for the cultivators specifically.
Yeah. I want to define what everyone is supposed to do in black and white, and leave room for creativity in making the products. But anytime it affects the market or public safety, I really think that it needs to be a level playing field and spelled out very clearly. And then, there are always going to be operators that are going to try to skirt around the rules or figure out other ways. But right now they're banking on the CCC not enforcing the current regulations that we have. And we aren't seeing a lot of enforcement actions, but we all know about examples of operators that we know aren't doing things the right way. And so we need more enforcement. Of the labs, we need more audits. We've been getting random inspections from the CCC with staff who have science background in the last year. And I think they've been doing a much better job than they used to of coming in and asking the right questions about, show me your quality control process, show me your calibrations, looking at records. I think they need to do more of that. As much of a distraction as it is when they come and they spend all day and you kind of have to halt everything and whatever you had planned, you have to cancel it.
Right.
As much of a pain as that is. And it would be nice if they could give us the heads up so we could plan around it, because we're not going to change anything.
I know. The unannounced.
The records are what they are.
The unannounced part of it is a little bit, we had an unannounced inspection. I call them surprise inspections.
Yeah.
And on our Slack channel, I always post the Monty Python theme. Nobody ever expects the Spanish Inquisition. Yeah. So they did that. And later on, I just posted it to the Slack channel and nobody got the joke. And I was like, I'm just old, I guess. But I think of that. I think of like, it's just a surprise. All of a sudden, like, hey, we're here. And it's just like, I'm like, and again, I wouldn't necessarily call it PTSD because that's obviously like a heavy term, but I definitely have like anxiety around authoritative people. I literally have had, I hope my kids aren't watching this, but I've been in jail before. I don't want to ever go, I get super anxiety driven. So I let my team kind of deal with it because I'm just like, you guys, everything's above board. Like we don't do anything that everything is under camera and we just run a tight ship, right? We have every single package accounted for all the times. All our scales are calibrated perfectly. I calibrated the scales myself sometimes just to like make sure we're doing it over and over again. Quality control. We do everything we can to make the best product as possible because this is not a short-term game for us.
Right.
This is a 20 or 30-year plan.
Right.
This is not something it just doesn't make any sense at all. But anyways, when they do the surprise, the unannounced inspections, as they say, I immediately have a ping of fear, being like, what did I do wrong? Am I going to get arrested? Like, am I going in the back of a cruiser tonight? Like, it's just so panic driving. And I feel like I'm definitely not the only one.
No.
Because I think there's a lot of other people who have way more serious things that they did time for, social equity, that they probably are like, what now? You know what I mean? Like of all the things, we're trying to run a tight ship. We're trying to do everything right. And all the things, it's just a big surprise.
Right. And if it were announced, I don't think it would take away from their ability to inspect because they're going to ask you to pull up records from the past, camera footage from the past. You can't change any of that.
Yeah, we get it. We got an NOD, notice of deficiency, a nod, because I think we had we didn't have one or two of the queries or something like that in our files. Like, okay, you got me. Like, we'll get it. We'll get it on record. Blah blah blah. So we didn't have them. We just didn't have them in the folder. You know what I mean? So it's like, sure.
Yeah, we just got one of those for metric trainings. Everyone has their metric trainings, but we hadn't put the most up-to-date version in the folder.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you got us there.
Like that.
Yeah, and it's like, it's paperwork stuff. It's typically what it is. And I think we hadn't returned one of our jars of distillate to the vault, even though it was in the vault already. So we were like, we just had to move it to the room. It was already accounted for. It was in the vault, but it just was still considered in the production room. So we just forgot to move it back because, again, sometimes it takes like a minute to catch up for everything, and they announced unannounced inspection, and all of a sudden we're panicking, what are we everything, and we just probably forgot that to even move that thing back. But we would have caught it if they weren't there, we would have had it done. Right.
I think the scary part too is that it's not clear what the punishments are going to be, and if it's going to be an NOD and you respond with your plan of correction, it seems like no big deal, but maybe it's going to be a huge fine. And I don't know where the line is between there is an NOD, there's a fine, they're going to shut you down. And I don't know what their priorities are. And I don't know, if they find a paperwork error, something that we obviously didn't know about because everyone's trying to be compliant all the time. So it can be scary because you don't know what the consequences are going to be or if there's something that you don't know. But I do think that they need more oversight of what the labs are doing, how they're doing it, checking records, checking trainings, and making sure that we're all at the same level with our quality control.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about, especially equal enforcement and all this other stuff that comes along with it.
Yeah.
But getting back to the testing side of things, I think to myself, other solutions and other ideas that come immediately to mind of how do we kind of like get beyond this. But there's been some bills kind of in play too, right? So I guess you walk me through kind of like what changes are actually being proposed right now.
Okay.
Are they from, is it the CCC that has to implement these things, or is it the actual state that has to be changing laws over these things?
Yeah. So most of them are things that the CCC could change at the regulatory level, but they're not. They're just not changing them. And so we're trying to go to the CCC and go to the State House, asking for the same things in both places and just hoping that it sticks.
Somebody does it.
Somewhere, yeah.
So what are the changes, I guess, we're being proposed?
Okay, so Bill H-146 that was put in by the MCC, the Mass Cannabis Coalition. I know you just had Ryan Dominguez on. So that one is focused on testing, and that would be that they would open all the data by lab and by state. So they would show you all the data accumulated for potency over time, microbials over time, et cetera.
And that is that data already stored in metric or something?
It's all in metric.
So it's already there. We just have to expose it.
Yes.
So are you talking about like publicly or
Yes.
internally through just licensed
Publicly.
operators?
Yeah.
So it's a public.
It's to open the data
because it's public
publicly.
safety. After
It's
the end of
public
the day.
safety, and I think there's a lot that's happening in the shadows with testing, and we need to see what it is that we're dealing with first. Is it one lab that's causing all the trouble, or is the variety, is the spread of variability just really wide and
Wider than we thought it was going to be?
Standardization.
Yeah.
So it will open the data and it will name the labs. So it'll be de-anonymized data by lab and by average. It will force the CCC to investigate any statistical outliers and report about what the reason was. It will eliminate soil and water testing, which is just one of those silly requirements that I think should be.
Well, if you're testing the plant anyways,
Yeah.
at the end of the day,
You're
the end result is that flower.
It's not
So
a
if it's not
public
there,
safety issue to remove it. It should. I always encourage testing of soil and water, but it's a business decision.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be a regulatory one. And then it will raise the batch size from 15 pounds to 25 pounds. I'm all for the first ones that I mentioned, raising the batch size. If we do that, I really want to make sure that we also increase the sample size. And that isn't in the bill, but I just want to, I'm trying to let legislators know to please pair the two so that we still have statistical representation of the sample.
Yeah.
And then there are other bills the MCC put forward that include topics like advertising, raising the purchase limits. Badging is a big one, and like again with these we're working on the CCC and the legislation and hoping that it sticks somewhere.
Yeah. So a couple of those that are obviously interesting to us is the badging side of things. Yeah. Badging, you hire it, and we've discussed this a little bit previously with Ryan specifically, and the badging requirements are just so burdensome sometimes.
Yeah.
You hire somebody, and then 3 weeks later they can finally start because they don't have a badge yet, and you're just like, so it's a business decision. Am I paying them for that time? Yeah. They give their 2 weeks notice, and we kind of trigger that query and all the other stuff, the background checks, and then eventually we get badged. 2 or 3 weeks later when they're about to start, anyways. Like, we have to kind of play around with that because as a small company, if we need somebody, it's like we need somebody because everybody's already wearing multiple hats here, right?
Yeah.
So the badging one, I think, makes a lot of sense. Basically allowing the badge to be attached to the employee versus the employer. So the employee could have that badge and they can transfer it to additional, So I think it's great especially for social consumption because it's like, hey, I want to pick up a shift at the local consumption lounge and I'm a bud tender.
Right.
So I'm a bud tender at XYZ dispensary, and I'm going to go to the social consumption, and I have one badge, and I can work here,
right?
Because I've been tested, I've done through RVT,
Yes.
I don't have any deficiencies against me.
Or for seasonal work for outdoor growers,
trimmers, harvesting
within vertically integrated companies where everyone has to have multiple badges. They've just got like a keychain full of badges for every license type.
Yeah.
So just having one badge, having the employee own it, and having it be transferable.
Now let's talk about...
And they did talk about that yesterday in the CCC public meeting, and it seems like they're going to try to fit that in with social consumption. And I didn't hear any dissenting voices from the commission, so I think they are going to change
I think there's some... I mean, that's one of the obvious ones. And when I had Executive Director Travis Ahern on the pod, he had mentioned that that's like kind of a no-brainer. That makes a lot of sense. I did hear some dissent, specifically, again, a layer removed on LinkedIn yesterday, that somebody said something like it's a revenue stream for them, so they don't necessarily want to change things because they want everybody badged, but that revenue goes to the state.
Right.
And then the state determines their budget.
Because I went back and watched because I saw the same post, and they were saying that it's a revenue stream, but that they don't get it. They were just kind of naming that as like, we're just putting it out there. But I don't think that is an issue that's going to stop them from moving forward on it.
Yeah, because again,
it's supposed to be a neutral cost.
Right, exactly. So in order for people to, and again, it should save them money because they don't have to do it for every single license type. They don't have to get the licensing staff to make sure that all these badges are whatever they have to do in the background side of things, behind the scenes side of things at the CCC.
Yeah.
But what about like advertising? So here's the thing. Could you take advantage of any of that stuff? Like, how would you, like,
as a testing lab?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't apply to us.
Doesn't apply to you at all, right? So how do you get the word out? It's probably through the networking and relationships.
About
building.
testing?
About, getting new customers and stuff like that.
It's so relationship driven. So I just try to get out there and go to events and know as many people as I can. And I've been really vocal and really clear about what SafeTiva stands for. And then everyone just needs to decide what kind of testing partnership do they want. And at this point, you only have so many choices, and each lab has their own personality and mission and values. And I think everyone kind of knows what every lab is about at this point.
There's 10 right now?
10, yeah.
And
there are a couple really small ones that people don't know as well. But for the most part, I feel like, at least with SafeTiva, I've been really public about we're always going to do the right thing every single time. And if that's not what you want, then we're probably not the lab for you. So
when it comes to the 10 that are remaining, and there's a couple of small ones mixed in there, out of the 10, I guess you're including yourself into that 10? Yeah. You're a scientist. I always wanted to be a scientist when I grew up. You're so lucky. Fun. Yeah, I bet. Where was I going with that one? Oh, so when it comes to, you have the inside baseball kind of knowledge right here. You're like, you see it all. You also understand it all because you can interpret it like, oh, that's weird. Out of the 10, how many do you think are actually like on the up and up? Yeah. Doing the right thing. Doing the right thing. 6, 7, 8, 10? 7. 7. All right. Fair answer. So... yeah, it's kind of a loaded question. I know it puts you in an awkward position because you obviously know all these people too. So, 7 out of 10 are actually on the up and up, and then eventually, if public data gets exposed, the potential 2, 3 that may not be on the up and up might also get exposed in that sense. Yeah. And for the vendor, how do you say? For the cultivator, the manufacturer, whoever's actually hiring you for your services. Yeah. What's their big driver in decision making? Do you know? Have you studied that? Results first. So I think whenever a licensee is open to switching labs, or they're just coming on the market and they want to start with a new lab, the first thing they do is they send samples to as many labs as they were able to get a response back from. So a handful of labs they'll send their samples out to, and they'll choose the one that gets them the best results. That's what I've seen. We've had many engagements. Not about price. It's usually about price after. Right. And so they'll tier the labs based on results, and then they'll start negotiations about we expect this much volume, so can you give a volume discount? And that's usually when price comes into play. But price doesn't matter if you're not delivering the results that they're looking for. Right, exactly. So that's like you have a tier 1. You're like, oh, they all got us 30% plus because we know we're master growers and we make the best weed. And we've been doing this for 20 years in my mom's basement. So I grow so if it's not 30%, they're wrong, Right. So there's that tier, the upper tier of people just get the results. And then after that, they're like, okay, so what's the price on this? And then you kind of break it down from there. So when it comes to the actual the people who grow like this fire and they're just growing like the premium stuff and stuff like that, and you find it's not exactly that result, do you immediately say to yourself, oh, I'm not getting that business?
Yes. Yep. I know every time.
Yeah, because you're like, you got 22% result back. I might call them and,
well, so if they're a new client, then I won't know what results to expect. It is like it's a shot in the dark. It is what it is. If they're a client that we've worked with for a long time, then we kind of understand the trend of their data. And so when something comes in much lower, then I'll usually pick up the phone and I'll say, you're going to get a COA that's lower than what we usually see. And I just wanted to let you know, and we can brainstorm what's going on. And if you want to do additional R&D testing and try to figure that out. Sometimes we need to do virus testing or additional like.
You mean for hop latent virus?
For hop latent, or we have a panel that includes 8 other common cannabis viruses.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, when it comes to like, so you get that, you're like, you got me the good results. Now let's talk about price. Like, is that typically the order, or is there a third thing I'm not thinking about? Because we actually have a different type of thing when we look for our test results, which I've definitely shared with you.
Which is accuracy, like
stability. Because for us, we know exactly what we're putting in each time, and we actually will require our vendors who we're purchasing the raw THC from to use the same lab because we trust. Right. So we always have to hit that mark, and if they do that, then we know exactly what ours is going to come out to. Right. Because again, on our side, especially on the tincture side, back before we got the adjustment to go above 500 milligrams for the tinctures, we had to know, because if it went above 500, then we had to A, reformulate, B, it delays everything, C, we got to go through all new test results, which means we got to pay for another full panel. Right. So like that costs us thousands of dollars in lost revenue and expense. Yeah. So for us, we just needed the stability. So you remember that, right? Good.
Yeah. You're in a unique position. I think manufacturers generally feel the same way, especially when they're making MIPS, any of the edibles,
gummies and stuff. Yeah, has to hit the numbers.
It needs to be consistent.
Yeah, because if it's 5.6 milligrams per serving, you're like, I'm out of compliance now. Right. Yeah.
So you're right. There's some difference depending on the angle of the industry that a client is looking through the lens of, but also turnaround time matters. Customer service matters a lot, but that's more of a long-term thing. You can't really know that to hope that someone would pick up the phone and call you, or to anticipate what your needs are ahead of time. To see if your numbers are starting to creep up with heavy metals or something, and to give you that warning before you fail, but to like really know you well enough, that stuff all takes time.
So how would you grade yourself on all those things?
Well, I think we're the best at everything.
A, right? You're from academia. You'd be like, of course I got straight A's.
It's for us as scientists, it's all about accuracy first. And are we doing the best method we can to extract all of the cannabinoids from the product and then measure them accurately, identify them and quantify them. And so for us, it is an academic endeavor, and it's about consistency, and it's about having robust protocols and a quality control process so that we never make mistakes or things don't slip through the cracks. So that's like, we've had to build a robust system behind what we do to feel really confident. And I'll say the first year that we were operating, there were lots of moments where our protocols were not as robust as they could have been. And so I understand the hesitance of companies working with newer labs, because they really need to get their feet under them. And we definitely lost clients because we weren't as consistent as we could have been. And so it takes time. And now I feel like, as of like early 2024, maybe mid 2024, I felt so confident with where we are that now I'm ready to go after the big fish and really feel like, okay, we've built it. It's so solid now, and now I can just like put it all out there and hope that people can see all the work that we've put into it.
Yeah, because I think what you're talking about is customer service, stability, obviously.
Yeah.
So getting the results that you expect, and that consistency across all the things.
Yeah.
And are you, because there's obviously these third-party labs, testing labs, there's 10 of them. Like, are you guys just trading customers at this point because there's so many fewer licenses coming online? Yeah. Are you in a growth mode right now? Are you growing?
Yeah, we have capacity for more, and we've had a good year. I honestly think that the industry is finally coming to a place where they are valuing accurate data, and they want to de-risk their company by working with a lab that they trust to do the right thing. Because now there's off-the-shelf testing. We've seen some recalls. There are rumors, there's reputation, and it all comes down to what's on the label, what's on the COA, what lab are you working with, and because, as I said, every lab has their own personality and set of values that the industry generally understands and has identified about each one. I think people are starting to settle out with some of the labs that they really trust to do the right thing.
Yeah, you do have the like, I don't want necessarily call them rogue, but like journalists who are being like, hey, I'm going to go test all these products. I bought them from these stores. I'm going to go test them all, and here's the results. Yeah. And it's like wildly different than, the COA, for instance. And they're like, what's going on? And they raise a big stink about things. And you're like, well, it just might be natural variability of the plant, which we all know could be 10% plus or minus. And then the test results 10% plus or minus. And like all of a sudden you're thrown off by, 15, 20%. And I feel like it's funny because it's almost like there's no lab that's immune to that.
Yeah.
Because I think even at one point you were getting attacked for test results.
People go to fraud so quickly.
Yeah.
They'll see some variability and they'll immediately call out fraud, or they'll test something off the shelf with no understanding that cultivators pick their own samples. We can only test what we're given. This test sample could be wildly different from what's actually on the shelves. There's a lot of buttoning up that has started to happen, but we still have a long way to go. And everyone, I mean, in our nation generally, I would say there's this attack on science and people not trusting scientists and thinking that we're all motivated by bribes and white envelopes. And,
yeah, exactly. There's
right?
a back
like,
door,
no
like,
one's
hey.
ever offered me some envelope of cash. And so I don't think it's nearly as nefarious as some of the independent journalists would make it seem. I honestly think the majority of labs are doing the best they can and trying to be honest.
Yeah, because labs come to us all the time. You're like, hey, we're a new lab starting up. And of course, this was happening more like last year, 2023, 2024. We were getting approached by labs, every once in a while. And they'd be like, we've got the best robust protocols, and everybody's selling their wares. They're like, here's all the things that we can do for you and all these other things. And actually, speaking of which, one of the things that you guys aren't part of this because you've never done this to me. Your team went out, bought our product from a local store, and then tested it on your own.
Yeah, we were refining our beverage
SOPs,
testing. Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that across different types, because depending on your particular formulation and method of delivery, the extraction process can be really different.
Exactly, because in the science side, you're dealing with different types of solvents. You're going to try to extract out of this, and then run it through the chromatography or whatever. I don't know all that stuff, but you know what I mean. Yeah, you get it. So when I think about that stuff, I think about a person wanting my business, and they'll be like, okay, so we'd love to have your business. Can you send us a sample? And they'll ask us to send a sample, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, then it'll just be like $350. So we'll do. And I'm like, you want my business, but you're gonna charge me for the test results? I don't care. I don't want to change. Yeah. Everything's been fine. Yeah. Our testing lab, we've been very consistent with ever since. And they weren't our first testing. We were looking probably at MCR back then. Everybody was like, oh, MCR, because it was also CDX's Western Mass. And
they're North Shore.
Oh, they're North Shore. That's what it was. I can't remember where they are. But MCR was Framingham. So we're like, okay, that's close. We'll just use MCR like everybody else. But they weren't getting back to us. They just weren't picking up their phone. And
so busy.
They were just like, who cares? We get so much business, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But it's funny when a new testing lab would come on, they'd be like, all right, so that'll be $300. And I'll be like, you want our business? Just take it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Just take the sample and do whatever you want with it. If you get good results, it kind of almost doesn't matter to us. It's more about stability, which is that long-term play. And also customer service actually would be another component of it, right? Because it's we should be able to just call somebody and be like, hey, or like even, can you just expedite this one sample for us because it is what it is,
Exactly. Yeah.
Actually, one controversial thing that I actually remember from back in the day, I think you would inform me about this, people who are doing 1-day turnarounds for microbials. So there's a special machine that can speed up the process of microbials, but it's actually wildly inaccurate, right?
No, that's what a lot of independent journalists will say.
Oh, that's what it is.
Actually
I got it from somewhere.
Yeah. So there's Pathogen DX is one of the PCR platforms, and it's different in that it's endpoint PCR and then microarray. And microarray is the detection method. So there are these 96 well plates that have probes, DNA probes printed, microscopic, on the bottom of the glass. And when there's a DNA match, the DNA will bind to the probe and a fluorophore is released. So a green or a red fluorescent molecule is released, which you can detect when you put it in this detector machine. And so you're looking at all these red and green dots on the slide. And that detection method is so sensitive that you don't need that much material up front in the process. And so it gets around the enrichment phase,
which is when you have to grow it in the lab.
You have to grow,
because a microbial, we're talking about like bacteria and stuff like that or whatever, right? Like what would you consider microbial? Sorry.
So bacteria, yeast, and mold.
Okay, bacteria, yeast, and mold, which if you take the sample, the traditional way of doing it was to grow it probably in a petri dish or something like that, right? And if you saw something grow, or you could detect it using obviously equipment, then you'd be like, okay, it there was 3.2% or whatever. But this system with the matrix, with the fluorescent colors, you can kind of, it only takes a day because you need much less.
Like 8.5 hours.
Wow.
And they do the total yeast and mold and all the bacterial categories and the E. coli and salmonella. And so you could test a full sample in 8.5 hours, which allowed us to have next day turnaround time, because bio is the bottleneck. That is the
yes.
And so that's what we were using to start. We then added plating at SafeTiva to our protocols. Now we also have plating. And again, everyone is using different things. But without understanding the science of how everything works, a lot of people have been saying like something that takes a short amount of time can't also be accurate. And therefore,
that's
those
what it
labs
came
must
from.
be
Okay.
cheating.
So exactly. So the microarray versus the plating, right? So when it comes to, I'm assuming plating is more traditional because I remember being in science class and be like, oh, there's a petri dish and there's an agar in it, and you do your thing, and you grow things in it. Like when you put your hand in it, and it just all of a sudden starts blooming all these germs over the next couple of days. Yeah. That's what I think about. And when I think about microwave, I think obviously technology, innovation, things advance. And so we should be able to actually rely on those things. Is that something is the CCC might be like, you have to use this particular protocol? Like, would you go so far to say, if there's going to be standards, even if we'd have to give up our microwave and go back to plating, you'd be okay with that?
Yeah. So all of the ITLs meet monthly. And I had proposed to them that the CCC isn't standardizing us. Our clients are very frustrated that they're getting different results. Recalls were happening, off-the-shelf testing. We just need to all pick something and do it together. So can we all come together and pick something? I put a proposal out there that for the enumeration tests, which are all of the tests where we report a number, we all do plating or culture-based methods. So
sure.
They're growing, we count colonies. For the species-specific test, I still think PCR is the better technology to use for that. So for E. coli and salmonella, and if the CCC ever adds any more, PCR is the way to go. And so, but we need to standardize the enumeration tests first. So far, we've got all but 2 labs have agreed, let's do plating. One of them has come around and it has started using plating, I hear. And so I think there's only 1 lab now that's holding out. And this.
But you said there's 10 labs, so you counted to 9. You're not including yourself in that calculation?
Sorry, this was before A to Z closed.
Okay.
So now we're down to 10 now. So 8 labs agree 8 labs have signed on, yes, let's do microbial testing. So 2 said, no, we don't want to do plating for microbial. Yeah. One of the labs has now started using plating since we took that vote.
Because they were on PCR before.
They were on PCR.
Yeah, and they were like, why would I go backwards in technology?
Yes, exactly,
right.
Which makes sense. And I, as a molecular biologist, PCR is a very powerful tool. I find it very useful. We are able to give our clients exactly, here are your species that are infecting your facility. Here's your problem exactly, and here's how you treat it. Versus plating, where you have no idea what it's just dots on a plate. You don't know which species are making this.
Yes, that makes sense, because
Right,
you're
so-
counting colonies, like you said. So I guess with PCR, though, I think that might be just an add-on service at that point. If people are like, hey, I actually do want to know
species,
because we might have a problem in our facility. What is it? So, but I feel like something like PCR is maybe a bottleneck because those machines probably are really expensive, right? Whereas a plate is just a plate,
Exactly.
you know what I mean?
Which is why I think it's much easier to require the labs to do plating than to require labs to do PCR. PCR is much more technically difficult. You have to do a lot of troubleshooting. So the biologists using it really need to know what to look out for. You can easily report the wrong number if you don't know what quality checks to look for. So it's more technically difficult. It's more expensive, but it is faster.
Interesting. Well, we love a good turnaround, so definitely would love PCR over probably what we're currently doing now that I think about it, because it's like it does take a few days for everything to get back to us, but we are tuned, our production is tuned up enough that we probably could smooth out a lot of those bumps regardless right now. But I do think about bottlenecks because of this whole idea of the industry growing by a couple licenses a month, as opposed to back then it was like 20 new licenses were coming online and everybody's like, all right, let's go, as an ITL, you'd go out and be like, all right, let's go contact all these people. They just got their finals or whatever. And so when you're kind of like swapping customers and you're really going to go hard in the paint on like, hey, let's go after the big guys, like you said, because you have everything dialed in and you know exactly what you're talking about and you can back it up with science, but also with performance.
Yeah.
So now that you're kind of going after these bigger customers, for instance, and it's really just like a trading game between the ITLs, I would imagine that equipment potentially, if you were to continue to grow, might be a bottleneck at some point, right? Is that a typical bottleneck you find in labs? Is like, oh, we can only bring in so many people because if we have 8.5 hours, there's one machine's dedicated to it. And then you have got another one behind it. You're like, okay, waiting for that to finish to get another one. Do you have like a bunch of PCRs or?
Well, yeah. So I think for the first few labs that came into the market, they ended up being constrained by space and instruments. And so that was one of the benefits to being later, was learning from that mistake. And so we have a really big space with room to grow. So we have 1 or 2 instruments for everything that we do. And then as demand grows, we'll have plenty of space to add more. And we've added a second shift, which helps a lot too.
That's awesome.
And then a lot of the instruments will run overnight. And so the last shift will load them, and then the morning shift will analyze the results.
Are you profitable?
I decline to answer.
Well, because I think about adding a second shift, that seems like there's a lot of...
I will just say that labs are struggling a lot. I think it's a really hard time for labs. It's a hard space to be in. It's really hard to be profitable. It's a very expensive business. The per sample costs, the overhead, the consumables, the margins are very tight.
Well, I think of consumables specifically because when you go to do one of these lab tests, there's things that you have to purchase because they're consumed during the testing. And so therefore, you can't just reuse that same thing over and over again. You have to throw that one out and pull a new one off the shelf, which costs money every time you're pulling it off the shelf. So is the pricing for ITLs, is the pricing reasonable? Would we expect prices to go lower or higher, or is it kind of like right where it should be?
I can't imagine prices go lower. We're at a point now where I think that there must be labs that are running at a loss because I don't understand how they're doing it.
Charge so little.
Yeah, because the consumable costs have grown, but the lab pricing has gone down.
Is this due to tariffs or is this due to
Some supplies are due to tariffs. Others are just people freaking out about the economy in general, or the administration. But, I mean, generally in any economy, the cost of goods goes up.
Over time. It's inflation.
Over time.
Yeah.
Right.
It's inflammation? No, it's inflation. Sorry.
And it is inflammatory.
Yeah, exactly.
But the lab pricing has gone in the other direction, and so it's gotten a lot harder, and we're at the bottom, I think.
I think a lot of people say that about the, cannabis in general, right? Because it's like, okay, because even us, the distillate price is going up a lot more than we were anticipating. And so we were getting distillate as low as $2.50 a gram last year. And now people are quoting us, we have some locked in contracts around $4 a gram. But like some people who are looking at like bigger contracts with are like $5 a gram, $5.50 a gram. And it's like, well, we didn't have that in our original costs, right? So we actually had to raise our prices recently because packaging tariffs, et cetera, because all of our packaging, like majority of packaging is from China. That's like our bottle is a very unique like looking bottle. Like you can't get that here. Every time you say, oh, there's a domestic source, I found it online and stuff like that, they just bought it from China too. You know what I mean? Like they onshored it, but like it's sitting in some domestic warehouse, but originally it came from China. So a good portion of our packaging comes from China, which of course we got hit with, but we have a pause on, which is great. But hopefully we can ship a bunch of product packaging over real quick before that gets defaulted. Then it reverses. But then also the distillate prices are going up because a lot of people who are like, it's not worth it to make distillate anymore. They're running at a loss. Like, how can somebody sell it for $2.50? Like, it costs us $1.50, $2 to make it on our own, and there's no profit left in it. There's no margin left in it after that because we got to pay our rent. We got to pay all these other things. So, from my perspective, I think to myself, what is the kind of what's the actual price of distillate moving forward? And I always try to bank on that. Be like, okay, if it's $5, we'll just it'll be $5. And that's just what it is. And we'll operate with that one. But man, it was so nice to get that $2.50 a gram, right? So when I think about that, I also think about test results, right? So it's like for testing labs, obviously we're spending lots of money on thousands of dollars a month in testing, right? So it's like prices going down, you're saying it's unimaginable because people are potentially already operating at a loss because they're so low.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what to think about it because the industry, to go back to your original word, chaos. There's just, it's how do you survive in a system that's built to, well, I think overregulation, of course, because we're all adults. Again, I always think at the consumer side, like we're adults here. If you're 21 plus, you should be able to just advertise and get your products and, whatever. But on your side, it's kind of like, well, public safety. Like we have to make sure these test results are accurate, and we also have to make sure that the test results are reflective of the plant material, not necessarily just like some, number that you pulled from the sky.
Right. I think there's a lot we can do that fulfill both, that we are helping to help the industry thrive and be healthy, and that businesses can make money as well as protect public health. And in that intersection, I think those are the no-brainers. Advertising, purchase limits, badging, removing soil and water testing. Those are all things that are going to help save the industry money that don't impact
public safety.
The public safety.
Yeah, I appreciate those thoughts. So, I mean, there's so many different angles into this industry, right? Because we're talking to lobbyist groups and, trade groups like MCC. We're talking directly to the CCC on this podcast, the executive director, Travis Ahern, and before that, Commissioner Roy, who was the first person to put the word fraud in my head because I never heard. I was thinking about, lab testing discrepancies, really, not fraud. But she kind of put that vocabulary out there and it's my head. And then you get people who are coming from the traditional market and they're coming in and they're seeing like, I know how it used to work and this is a different style of working. And then you get people who have never been in the traditional market coming in fresh, right? And they're kind of like as an outsider coming in. There's all these different types of people kind of aggregating around, specifically in Massachusetts cannabis, all the different various ways you can slice and dice it. And I want to go back to that point you made earlier. Not everybody's getting along right now with what they think should be the right path forward. So I've extended an invite to Kevin, who Gilnack, I think his last name, who runs Massillon, who is opposed to certain things like the limits being raised on the licenses, right, for dispensaries specifically. And he represents a handful of social equity people who are and a bunch of people who are not in favor of raising the caps because they think it goes against social equity. So it's interesting to see, because before, like a year ago, everybody's like, yes, we're just going to all win and this is going to be great. Not a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe, maybe 2019. But we're all like aligned. We're all going to win. We're all going to do this. Let's all get along in kumbaya. And now we're starting to see fractures, right? And testing labs are kind of also a little bit of that fracture. Like not everybody's playing ball, because it's like, well, I have my way of doing it. We're going to do it our way from now on. And we're willing to take a loss because in the short term, because we know long term, you guys are all going to bleed out and we're going to still exist.
Right, exactly.
So there's different people and different personalities in play here. And it's, I'm part of it, but I'm also just an observer, like to see how all these things are going to play out.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, do you just focus on what you do?
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of our staff, all scientists who came from the food testing industry, environmental testing, pharmaceutical testing, they've seen it in other industries where it's so regulated, it's so buttoned up, it's very professional, detailed records, everything is clean. You do everything by the book. And then they came to cannabis and they're seeing what's going on, all the public discourse around testing, and it's just bonkers to them what is happening. And I think that we need to get closer to those other industries that are more buttoned up with testing in order for us to be considered mainstream, just like any of those other industries. As we go more mainstream, the testing it'll just be a given. It'll just be everyone trusts what it is. It is what it is. And like, that's the part of the industry that keeps everybody safe and keeps a level playing field. And as we get more mainstream, I think the consumer profile, the demographics will change as well. It'll start skewing older. As it skews older, THC will become less valued as much as like balanced products. I think that's all where we need to go.
So let me pitch you an idea, and then I'll let you have some final words because we're about to wrap. All right. So here's the idea I had. One of the ideas I had around how to solve some of these issues around like tack hunting and stuff like that, and the marketing side of it. Because I do feel like that is kind of a systemic issue, because the consumer just demands 40% or 35% plus THC. If they're demanding it, the dispensers are going to want to deliver on that, and they're only going to want to work with people who can only produce that. Even if all the testing results are perfect and kumbaya on ITLs, and everybody's just like, yeah, we're all aligned, we're all with variants, but yeah, it's like natural plant variants of 5-10%. Other than that, like everybody's doing it above board, and they actually are doing it in a way with SOPs aligned with an existing kind of industry.
Yeah.
Right. And so everybody's just like, yep, we got testing, we nailed it. Right.
Yeah.
But if the consumer's still going in and still asking for 40% THC, that's kind of what's going to sell still. And then craft cultivators are going to be really upset because they're not going to be able to, they don't necessarily want to produce that because they know there's so much other benefits to minor cannabinoids and blends and terpene profiles and stuff like that, they're just not going to be like, that's not interesting to them anymore, right?
Yeah.
So one of the concepts that I'd started developing earlier this year, and I've been kind of teasing it out to people just to see what their thoughts are, which is, are you familiar with the Pantone system? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Pantone system, for those who don't know, the Pantone company back in like the 1950s, 1960s, I don't recall the exact time, they created a system for color, right? So if you were to print something in Germany and it was a specific type of yellow, and you'd go to print it in Los Angeles in a specific type of yellow, they'd be like, it's yellow. That's how they translate it. And be like, okay, we'll make a yellow, and it's a totally different yellow than they made in Germany. Yeah. So to solve that, Pantone came up with a system that says, okay, if you use, 5 parts of Pantone red, 2 parts of Pantone green, and yada, 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 you'll get this color, whatever that color makes. I actually don't color theory. It's been a minute since grade school. But when you get that particular shade of color, then that person in Los Angeles now can recreate it based on those same kind of, that recipe, that formula to be able to recreate that color.
Right.
So I thought to myself, why couldn't we apply that to cannabis? Why can't we create a color swatch based on the cannabinoid ratios in a product? And therefore, if you go to a store and you see an orange, you're like, that's the color.
Yeah.
I have great sleep when I try orange.
Yeah.
And then you're like, but pink? I love pinks because I want to have fun with my friends and I want to have pink. And you have all these different shades that represent all these different cannabinoid combinations. So you're not seeking out 40%, you're seeking out a specific color.
Yeah.
So if all the packaging and COAs even had that color on it, because it's a formula, like anything, right? You generate the formula and it says that's pink. And so when you get it on the packaging and it's pink, you're like, oh, do you have anything shades of pink? That's the language you use potentially with the bud tender.
Right.
And then they would go and be like, yeah, we actually do. We've got this one from Kennel Lab Genetics. We've got this one from Coastal Healing or whatever, right? Like we've got all these pinks in our vault. So yes, which one would you like?
Yeah.
Then they can shop maybe more prescribed to what they would like based on TAC content.
Yeah.
However, I also think about terpenes as well. So I was thinking about having a second swatch for terpenes. So terpenes like a linalool would be like a purple, right? And limonene would be like a yellow. And you'd be able to say like, okay, so I like pink yellow. Because pink yellow, that's party time for me, right? Or if I want to do like an orange and a purple, because that's going to put me to bed. And you immediately have a visual indicator that's going to allow a person to walk into the store and speak a common language across all stores. And then you'll be able to sell, the craft cultivators will be able to sell, you know, this really great 2-1-1 blend of THC, CBD, CBN, or whatever it might be. Yeah. And because that's going to produce this color, which is a really great color for a lot of people.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. Kara Crab Burnham and I had been working on a system where we had a rainbow for cannabinoids and a rainbow for terpenes. And then depending on how the test results came out, it would automatically, like on our COA, you get the results, you get a QR code, but you also get this rainbow of colors where red might be higher, orange might be smaller, right? And so there's automatically a visual of the profile of what that looks like.
That's fantastic.
But I like your system better because it means that a client or a consumer walking in, that there's just one thing. Just one thing that they know what to ask
Yeah, there's
for.
no gradient to it. It's literally just pink.
Yeah.
And it's a shade of pink that you really could resonate with, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, the hard part is packaging, and it's so hard to fit more stuff in there and to like create a new system.
No, totally.
It's just, but if you can get buy-in from the industry, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah,
and we could start adding it to our COA.
Yeah, because you know that down the line in the short term, I don't know when it's going to roll out, but I know Metric has a new RFID system, right?
Yeah.
And the RFID system, when you scan that QR code, is supposed to go directly to the COA. And if the COA also has the swatches already on it, because it's already in Metric, then that person will get that confidence, be like, yep, this is the one we got.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So again, just because I think of humans as very visual, they're just like, oh, pink, I like pink. Yeah. You know, versus like...
for all those who are colorblind, but...
True. Maybe...
But they would know what to call it. They would know to say... I want yellow, and they might not see the color, but
I want this one. Yeah, I totally am disrespecting the entire color impaired people. I apologize to all the color impaired people. But there was actually a person commented on LinkedIn when I don't know what I was posting about, but they commented. It was somebody who specialized in cannabis products for blind. And so they were like, could you add Braille to your packaging? And I was like, great idea. I have no idea how that would work.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
I don't really have blind people I have a few deaf people in my, you know, through relatives and stuff like that, but not really blind. So like, I actually don't know much about that stuff, but I do feel that accessibility aspect of it. So blind, or colorblind, I should say, is an interesting perspective on that. Cause it's like, yeah, you can't really tell now. You know what I mean? Unless you write the words yellow below it.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as you write the word, it'll be fine.
So I do think about those things a lot because, and again, I'm not a flower person. I consume my products, of course, but I don't consume flower often or very rarely. Maybe at Flower Expo, I'll be like, hey, take a puff. I'll be like, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
But since I'm such a low dose consumer, I always get wary about that stuff because if it is 40%, I'm not going to be right in the head for the rest of the day. Yeah. So I have to be very careful. Right. You know, people are like, hey, how do I have a dab? I'm like, you don't know who I am, man. Like a couple milligrams, I'm good. You know what I mean? Like 5 milligrams, I'm pretty good for the night. Yeah. Maybe 10 if I'm feeling a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
And I make high dose products. So whatever that might mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
So getting back to it though, I do feel like just part of the destigmatization, the normalization, this plant is here to stay for a long time. This is not a short-term game. This is a long-term game. So we have to build relationships. We have to be above board with what we do. We can't think of short-term fixes for things. We have to think through the long-term scheme of this to be able to make a prosperous industry for all, right?
Yeah.
Because I do think, and this is something that was said a lot back in 2019 when I was coming up, was when is the last time you ever had something that became some intoxicant, we'll say, for lack of a better word, some new type of experience became legal where it was previously illegal?
Yeah.
This is it.
Right.
This is a generational wealth building opportunity if you play your cards right.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of pain to get there, though, and we've also gone through a lot of pain internally ourselves.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're past most of that pain. Now we have growing pains versus like sinking feelings of dread pains.
Yeah, right.
So that's where we kind of exist in this spectrum of the industry as it's continued to grow, is to create systems like a color system that's going to outlast me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of what I think about often is like, what am I leaving as a lasting impact on this industry, and how much more can I do to even archive it through a podcast, to be like, hey, here's what it was in 2025. This is the stuff we were talking about.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
This is an industry that is just still brand new-ish. You know what I mean? The plant's been around for thousands of years, but the industry hasn't. So I guess I'll part with those words. Do you have any parting words for yourself?
Just that I would encourage those who care about the direction of the industry to let their voices be heard. Join the MCC. The Mass Cannabis Coalition is doing a lot of work for advocacy, pushing the bills through, working with the CCC, and really collecting the voices. We have over 80 companies representing all different license types now, and I think it's just really important as we move forward that we have as many diverse voices as we can. So I just want everyone to join the MCC and contribute to the efforts to make the industry better, and hope that we can value honesty and ethics in a level playing field moving forward.
Yeah. The diversity is important to voices.
Yeah.
And I think Ryan's been really good at letting everybody's voice come through. Yeah. So if you are going to join the MCC, you will not be tampered. You'll be encouraged to pontificate according to what your beliefs are in the system, because one thing that I've been pushing against was slightly pushing against is the APCC model for collections, because I know collections can be difficult. I know there's a lot of pain there, but again, as a person who's kind of like a free market person, I don't want people to dictate what terms I can give or I can't give, right? And so, it stinks when you don't get paid. But that's, a lot of industries that happens too. So it's not just us. And when the economy goes down, people are going to be less and less, straightforward with paying. Yeah. So like, if the economy is doing great, then everybody's doing great. Everybody's paying. So it's like, the more regulation sometimes doesn't sit well with me. But that I shared my voice. MCC was open to hearing it at least. Not necessarily we're all going to agree on everything all the time. So I like the diversity of voices actually is really important, because if you want your voice heard, go join the MCC or whatever lobbyist group that you most align with. Yeah.
Yeah. We're meeting weekly with someone at the CCC or senators and representatives. Someone is meeting weekly with us, and there are working groups that are getting a lot done with testing and cultivation, the AR collections challenges, and others. And I see that everyone's rolling up their sleeves and getting to work, and it's a really nice momentum from the grassroots community.
Love it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great. It's a great podcast.
Thank you.